Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, your host. I'll be with you for the next hour, and I want to continue now this morning where we left off in the book, The Ark and the Dove by J. Moss Ives, a Roman Catholic book written by a Roman Catholic author that paints the Maryland colony, the colony that was a Roman Catholic colony named after the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I want to remind the listeners one more time that it's easy, if you're not careful, to perceive the reading of this book as some sort of promotion of the Catholic religion and the Catholic Church and the Vatican, because it is a Roman Catholic book. It is by a Roman Catholic author, and it paints the Roman Catholic colony of Maryland and Catholicism in the most favorable light. It's not the purpose of Inquisition Update to legitimate an entirely diabolical system. And now, everyone who is a regular listener to Inquisition Update knows that I believe that the papacy is the seat of Antichrist. And the Pope is Antichrist proper. And there have been a succession of Antichrists culminating in the Antichrist that will see the return of the true Christ, the Savior of the world. And until that time, he will continue to deceive God's people. The purpose of the book is to understand the roots of Catholicism in this country, understanding the prophecies of Revelation chapter 17 and understanding the prophecies, particularly in Revelation chapter 13, that describe the United States as the second beast that had two horns like a lamb and appeared to be Christian, but spake like a dragon, and caused the whole world to worship the first beast, which is the sea beast, Rome. How is it that a nation that we once and probably always considered to be a Protestant nation could metamorphosize from a lamb-like nation to a nation that speaks like the beast and causes the whole world to commit blasphemy and accept the papacy as the vicar or the replacement of Christ on earth, arrogating to him all the powers of Christ on earth in a global papal hegemony, a global new world order under the headship of the Pope? How could this be possible? We study the roots of Catholicism in this country to arrive at some conclusions, to add another brick of in the wall of evidence that shows the prophecies are true, that Catholicism raised from almost nothing to complete control of our government and changed the direction and purpose of this country to serve not God, but Antichrist. Now, we've been through two sections of the book. This book is broken into three sections. The preparation, it likens Roman Catholicism's relation to the United States as a planter in his vineyard. In the first section, it talks about the preparation, the tilling of the soil. In the second portion of the book, it talks about the planting of this Roman Catholic colony, this Roman Catholic influence in the country. And now we're transitioning now into the harvest. And so, even by the terms that the author chose to break this book down into sections, we see a purpose with Roman Catholicism in relation to this country. First the planting, then the seeding, then the harvest. And now we've spent a lot of time talking about how, quote-unquote, marvelous this Maryland colony was to assure religious liberty for all faiths, Catholic, Protestant, Quaker, Puritan, and even Jew. But is that the direction the papacy is going? Can we see the stark contrast in the religious liberty that was the law of the land in the early Maryland colony with what we are beginning to see now in this country, where Catholicism rules supreme? You know, I can't quote the name of the author, but the quote goes something like this: when Roman Catholicism is in the minority, she's as meek as a lamb. When she reaches parity, she's as sly as a fox. But when she's in the majority, she roars like a lion. And history is replete with example after example after example of how when Roman Catholicism is in the minority, she's meek as a lamb. If nothing else, she pleads religious persecution. When in parity, she's sly as a fox, maneuvering, wrangling to get more and more and more control, deceiving those around her, and seeking higher and higher positions in government, higher and higher levels of power and influence and wealth. And then when she's in the majority, she's in control, and the first thing she does is begin to persecute other religions. So like I say, we're in the harvest section of this book now, still remembering that we're in colonial times. And this is chapter 1 of this third section, The Harvest, and it is entitled From Baltimore to Carroll. We're backing up just a few paragraphs from where we left off Friday. This is The Harvest. It says, during the first half century of its history, when there was no outside interference, colonial Maryland presents the fairest picture that can be found in any of the 13 colonies. So the author paints Maryland as an example, a glowing example of religious liberty and its form of government and its toleration and its overall outstanding character among the colonies. And it says, after the Revolution of 1688, which was a Protestant revolution, it took place in England, and it was transported to the colonies as well. It said, after the Revolution of 1688, this picture would seem to have been entirely obliterated. In other words, the Protestant Revolution changed dramatically, according to this author, the condition of things in this liberated, free, and tolerant Maryland colony. It said, leaving no trace of the influence of the ideals that guided its founders, speaking of religious liberty. Therefore, most historians have looked upon the recognition of the principles of religious liberty in early Maryland as merely a passing phase with no lasting result, and as having no bearing upon whatever upon the founding of the Republic. Now, what's the implication here? It had a profound influence on the founding of the Republic. Religious liberty is now considered to be a Roman Catholic characteristic that is transported into the eventual formation of a federal government in this country. Now, reminding the listeners again that this is not typical of Roman Catholicism. This is an extreme departure from the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church and the example set forth in the Dark Ages, where the papacy ruled supreme. He seated and unseated all the kings, and he launched crusades and inquisitions against non-Catholics. But here we have an entirely different nature of this Roman Catholic beast, just simply taking on the lamb's wool, appearing to be tolerant and peaceful and liberating to people. And the implication in this last sentence is that, therefore, most historians have looked upon the recognition of the principles of religious liberty in early Maryland as merely a passing phase with no lasting result, and as having no bearing upon the founding of the Republic. The implication is that most historians are wrong, that it did have a great and profound influence on the founding of our Republic. And it said Maryland was under the shadow of bigotry and intolerance from 1688. So that being a Protestant revolution, Maryland was now all of a sudden characterized as bigotry and intolerance from 1688 until the dawn of national independence. We're talking about the Revolutionary War now. So he's also implying another change taking place at the time of the Revolutionary War, when the colonies became nationally independent from Great Britain, and that this religious liberty would be restored. Let me read this again. It said, Maryland was under the shadow of bigotry and intolerance from 1688 until the dawn of national independence. But it has been entirely overlooked that during these dark days there were watchmen on the towers of Israel. Now, its likening is another point that I want to make about this statement that's very important for us to understand. He likens Catholicism as the towers of Israel. That during these dark days there were watchmen on the towers of Israel. Guardians, protectors, watchmen. Now, what is he referring to? The towers of Israel. Well, we naturally equate Israel with God's chosen people, whether they be Jew or Gentile. That's what the Bible teaches. But Roman Catholicism teaches replacement theology. Roman Catholicism teaches that when the Jews rejected and crucified Christ, never mind that the Romans had a great deal to do with it, that the promise, the Abrahamic covenant, fell upon the Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Catholic Church presents itself and professes itself and demands that everyone believe that the Roman Catholic Church is that church of Jesus Christ and there being none other. And that the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, falls to the Roman Catholic Church. And that they now replace Israel. They become Israel, the chosen people. And it's with that mentality that history records the persecution, the Crusades, the Inquisitions, the extirpation of the Waldenses, the Albigenses, the Huguenots, the Protestants, the Orthodox, the Jews, particularly in the Second World War. It's replacement theology. It gives them the divine prerogative to extirpate heresy off the planet. It's arrogance and it's blasphemy. It's not scriptural, but that's what Rome believes, that she is the inheritor of the covenant. And she refers to herself and her watchmen on the towers of Israel, on the towers of Catholicism. All anti-Jew hatred literally springs from the Roman Catholic Church, and it springs from this diabolical doctrine of replacement theology. It doesn't exist. Now, it says, on the eve of the revolution that overthrew the Baltimore government, that is the Protestant Revolution, that was responsible for the overthrow of the Baltimore government. In other words, religious liberty came to an end in the Maryland colony. There came to Maryland the first Charles Carroll, graduate of the University of Douai in France, a student of the Inner Temple. That means he was Masonic. He was taught in a Roman Catholic university, and he was also a Freemason, and or the Knights Templar, or some organization associated that way. Remember, Freemasonry has a degree called the Knights Templar. Freemasonry, despite what the papacy says, despite what Roman Catholicism says, at the top, they're like twin sisters. They all believe in a supreme deity. They all believe that you can worship this supreme deity by any name or any practice or any tradition. The Bible is not the single authority, that the Quran is equal to the Bible, that Buddhism is just as legitimate as any other religion, and Catholicism is Christianity, and that there ought to be one religion in the world where every religion is tolerated. Every apostate, satanic, non-Christian religion is to be accepted as equal, with one exception. That's religious fanaticism and religious, what's the word they use all the time? Fundamentalism. You know, they use fundamentalists, Muslim fundamentalists, to describe the most radical and terroristic sects of the Muslim faith. It's that reputation that is going to be transferred to Bible believers. Those who hold to the Scriptures that says there's only one name under heaven given among men whereby you must be saved. That intolerance is what they call it. Intolerance is what they hope to eradicate. And that's just a continuation of Roman Catholic history. They've always tried to eradicate Bible believers that hold fast to the Scriptures, hold fast to Christ, hold fast to the faith of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus. That is radical fundamentalism. That's how we are being defined in the world today. And Catholicism is embracing all the other pagan religions of the world in this great ecumenical kumbaya to form a one-world government. And there's a war going on against religious fundamentalism, now against the Muslims, which doesn't seem to bother anybody because of all the terrorism they're associated with, but that's going to be transferred to Bible believers. That's the direction this is all heading. All this is leading up to a crescendo, the ultimate goal of which is extirpate Bible believers, right along with the Islamic fundamentalists. So on the eve of the Protestant Revolution that overthrew the tolerant, I'll just add the word tolerant because that's the message that this author wants to get across, that overthrew the tolerant Baltimore government, there came to Maryland the first Charles Carroll. Graduate of the University of Douai in France, a student of the Inner Temple, Freemasonry, and a member of the English bar. He was an attorney, very powerful and obviously very wealthy. He received the appointment as Attorney General of the province from the 3rd Lord Baltimore. So the 3rd Lord Baltimore made him Attorney General of the province. And it says, as to the real reason for his migration, his illustrious grandson, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, a century and a half later wrote, quote, my grandfather, being a Roman Catholic by religion, resolved on withdrawing from the oppression of that period by emigrating to this country. He selected Maryland chiefly because toleration was by royal charter extended to it and afterwards confirmed by provincial statute. Upon leaving the mother country, that is Great Britain, where Catholicism was persecuted because of all the attempts of the papacy to seize the British crown, And many times we've enumerated all of the gunpowder plots and assassination attempts and Spanish Armada and on and on and on. Constant war. Britain had no choice but to suppress Catholicism to survive. Okay, upon leaving Great Britain, the mother country, he changed with a felicity of thought, almost prophetic, the motto of his family arms from in fide et in bello fortis to ubicumque cum libertate. Okay, that's Latin. I butchered it, but we'll get to the definition in a bit. And it says, in allusion to the cause which induced him to leave the shores of his native land. The Revolution of 1688 in England was succeeded by a revolution in Maryland. Remember, this Protestant revolution all of a sudden began to be an influence in the colonies. And he says, my grandfather was destined to experience, even in the asylum he had selected, that is Maryland, the evils of that religious persecution from which he had so recently fled. So he fled Great Britain to escape religious persecution, to seek religious liberty for his Catholic belief, came to the Maryland colony about the time of the Protestant Revolution, and he didn't gain anything, according to this author. Religious persecution met him when he got here. All right, now we're going to talk about the change of the motto on his family coat of arms. The change in the motto of the family coat of arms from strong in faith and in war, which was the first Latin phrase that I butchered, it became to liberty in all things. That was the second Latin phrase that I butchered. So he went from strong in faith and in war, which characterizes the Roman Catholic Church to a T. Strong in faith, because we're the only faith, if you get my drift, and strong in war, persecution, crusades, inquisitions, gunpowder plots, Babington plots, Spanish armadas, assassination attempts, war. That's what defines Roman Catholicism. Forced conversion, religious persecution, and war. And then he changed his motto to liberty in all things. See the transition? This is demonstrative of what Roman Catholicism was before the Maryland colony and what they practiced in the Maryland colony. But trust me, it's only temporary, and it's got a design and a purpose. Roman Catholicism came to this country meek as a lamb, but now the transition to the lion has taken place. And we'll talk about it when we get back to the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
All right, welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. The United States is the greatest asset the Vatican has ever had to strengthen its arm in the world. And it's a hideous reality, but it's time for God's people to understand it. Now, we're talking about a most illustrious and powerful Roman Catholic family that makes its inroads into Maryland at the time of the change of government during the Protestant Revolution in the colonies. And this is the Carroll family. And we're speaking of its patriarch in the colonies, Charles Carroll. And he changes the slogan on the family coat of arms from strong in faith and in war to liberty in all things. And that characterizes the phony facade that Catholicism had to put on in order to survive. Had Roman Catholicism come to this country with the same persecutorial attitudes and beliefs and practices that it expended during the Dark and Middle Ages, they'd have been put down immediately by the Protestants that came to this country. That the treatment of Catholics in this country, in the colonies, would have been just like that or even worse than that of Great Britain. And even in the first chapters of this book, we are reminded that Catholics aboard the Ark and the Dove were warned not to get into religious disputes with the Protestants. That we're going to the colonies for the same reason that the Protestants are going, to seek religious liberty and freedom from persecution. The Protestants, who were victims of the Inquisitions, the Counter-Reformation launched at the Council of Trent, the history all the way back to the earliest centuries of the persecution of God's people, those that held to the Scriptures, that the Vatican and the papacy tried their best to extirpate these quote-unquote heretics from Europe. The Catholics who were on the Ark and the Dove suffered religious persecution in Great Britain, the so-called Protestant Great Britain, because of the papacy's repeated attempts to take over the throne and dominate Britain. Everyone seems to have had enough, and the Catholics were on their best behavior, not challenging the Protestants, not trying to force their religion, not persecuting Protestants and non-Catholics to become Catholics or die. And that same attitude took a strong hold in the Maryland colony. Totally against Roman Catholic teaching, totally against Roman Catholic history. She appears to have two horns like a lamb, but she's going to speak like a dragon, and she's ready to roar in our day and age. Roman Catholicism planted in this country. First the ground was tilled, then it was sown, and now we're reaping the harvest in this portion of the book. So the change of the slogan in the Carroll family coat of arms demonstrates the temporary transition in attitude from a strict, illustrious Irish Roman Catholic family, the Carrolls, to liberty lovers, religious freedom lovers in the colonies. And you have to know that that was put on in order to survive. Put on a temporary change of face to accomplish an eventual advantage in the country. And that's what we see today. They control the White House, they control Congress, they control the Supreme Court, they control the Federal Reserve Bank, they control business, the media, the seminaries, the doctrines and false teachings that we now hear in our Protestant churches. They've infiltrated the Protestant churches. They've successfully hidden the identity of the Antichrist, which all the Protestant reformers knew. No one knows today, hardly, as a percentage of the population. How many in America know who the biblical Antichrist is? If you ask somebody, who's the Antichrist, we're not supposed to know. Oh, we won't know. We just don't know. Besides, we're going to be raptured out of here before he comes. See how ignorant we are? See how misled we are? See how lied to we are? We've bought this lie that Roman Catholicism is Christianity. We've bought the lie that they value religious liberty as much as we do. And now the lamb's wool's coming off, and our government, our Jesuit Vatican-controlled government, is now ready to roar like a lion. So we see the fulfillment of the Bible prophecy in Revelation chapter 13. Has two horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. And causes the whole world to worship the first beast. That's the papacy. So now we have all this emphasis by this elite Roman Catholic, Irish Roman Catholic family, changes their attitude from strong in faith and strong in war to liberty in all things. And it says it was not almost prophetic, it was truly prophetic, as is borne out by the life and services of the grandson who wrote the letter. And we were talking about Carroll's grandson, who talked about his grandfather, who first came here. He continues, he says, descended from the famous clan of the O'Carrolls, that's an Irish name, descended from the famous clan of the O'Carrolls, the Carroll family had a proud record in Irish history. Now, remember, this is a Catholic book and a Catholic author, so they must have had a proud Roman Catholic record in Irish history. It doesn't go into it much. But it says further, it says the family estate in Litterluna overlooked the valley of the beautiful River Shannon. Now let me just tell you that the Carroll family, while this book doesn't delve into it a great deal, it tells of the immense wealth and the landed estate that fell into the hands of the Carrolls when they came to this country. We'll talk about that. Where the money came from is up for us to decide. But I say they had a great deal of help from the papacy and Roman Catholics. They were put here by the Roman Catholic hierarchy in Europe and in Ireland to perform a particular role in the Maryland colony, a particular role for Catholicism and the papacy in this country. It's not just a Roman Catholic family. This Roman Catholic Carroll family is going to turn out to be one of the most prominent influences in the founding of our federal government. And so it's important for us to know the roots of the Carroll family in the Maryland colony. So they had this landed estate at Little Luna that overlooked the valley of the beautiful River Shannon. Quote, "We derive our descent from princes," Carroll says afterwards to his son, who was born to him after coming to America. Quote, "And until the Revolution in 1688, notwithstanding the sufferings under Elizabeth and Cromwell, we were in affluent circumstances and respected, and we intermarried with the best families in the Kingdom of Ireland." So this is a well-bred, well-educated, well-financed, and purposeful Roman Catholic family of blue blood origin. Irish blue blood. Roman Catholic blue blood. And it says the first Charles Carroll was 28 years of age when he came to America. Hardly had he become settled in his new abode when Cood's rebellion broke out, and this robbed him of the sanctuary he had sought. This is talking about the Protestant Revolution in the colonies. He said he became the stalwart champion of the Catholic colonists, and if the Protestant nonconformists did but realize it, he espoused their cause as well, which was religious liberty, right? For his opposition to church establishment, that is, the establishment of an official church, neither Catholic nor Protestant in the colony, was in keeping with the policy of separation of church and state adhered to by the Lords Baltimore that gave religious freedom to Protestants as well as Catholics. So here we see for the first time the word separation of church and state as the goal of Catholics in this Maryland colony. And you have to ask yourself, when in the world did the papacy or Catholicism ever endorse a separation of church and state? Never. Never in its history. It is still the teaching of Rome today that it is a pestilential heresy for there to be a separation or a wall of separation between church and state. The Vatican flag even pictorially depicts a union of church and state. The ecclesiastical or the papacy or the one true church of God, according to Rome, is all supreme. The spiritual power of the papacy is all supreme. As the vicar of Christ, he is the monarch of the world over spiritual things and temporal things. That's represented by the gold key on the Vatican flag. The silver key represents the civil power or the government. And the spiritual has preeminence and immunity from the civil power. And beyond that, the civil power must respond to the spiritual power of the Pope. In other words, no civil power is legitimate unless the Pope seats it. And the civil power may do nothing unless the Pope commands it. So the civil power is subordinate and responsive to the papacy, the ecclesiastical. Just as Christ is the head of the church, Pope is the head of the church. And Pope is Caesar as well. He holds two crowns, the ecclesiastical and the temporal. He is all in all in the Roman Catholic Church. There is no union of church and state ever taught in Roman Catholic doctrine and literature and bulls and encyclicals. No such thing. As a matter of fact, the separation of church and state is specifically damned by Pope Pius IX in his encyclical and syllabus of error. But here we have mention in this Maryland colony, a keeping with a policy of separation of church and state, adhered to by the Lords Baltimore, that gave religious freedom to Protestants as well as to Catholics. Now, this is completely uncharacteristic of Roman Catholicism. Any Protestant who became aware of some Roman Catholic-led doctrine of separation of church and state and religious liberty in the Maryland colony would say, "Hey, you got to be kidding. It can't happen." But that's what this book says did happen. And now this book is blaming the Protestant Revolution in the colonies for taking away that religious liberty for Catholics. Now, Protestantism is being viewed as the oppressor now. And if we view this from the Catholic point of view, that's what it's going to look like. And it's going to sound like I'm advocating it, but I'm not. What this book doesn't tell you is what Jesuit maneuverings and wranglings were taking place during this colony. Remember, if you've noticed, there's not been much mention of the Jesuits in the colonies. There were Jesuit priests on that ship, the Ark and the Dove, when they came over here. The Jesuits had a primary role in helping to establish the Maryland colony, and one's a fool to suspect that the Jesuits just, once they got here, went off to proselytize the Indians. Or were just spiritual advisors and leaders of the Catholics. No, the Jesuits did what they always do. They were eyeball deep in the government. They were eyeball deep in controlling and plotting and planning what the Vatican, what the Jesuits would have this country serve as it developed. And, of course, the book puts it out that there were always rumors of Jesuit infiltration and Jesuit intrigue in Britain, and that was transferred to the colonies. And there were all these nonsensical claims that the Jesuits were plotting in the colonies. That's what the book suggests. But history is going to record. And as we see today with the influence of the Jesuits in the 28 universities in this country and how they shuffle their graduates off into the highest political offices in our government, that they were just as much involved in the Maryland colony as they are today. And it rose to Protestant suspicion and Protestant revolution against this Maryland colony. And it says he resisted the subversion of Lord Baltimore's government. Charles Carroll resisted the subversion of Lord Baltimore's government and wrote to him of the strange rebellion your ungrateful people have involved themselves in. He wrote again, quote, neither Catholic nor honest Protestant can well call his life or his estate his own, if your lordship, according to your wonted care and tenderness of your people, by a speedy application and true representation of his majesty, of his inhuman actions, do not presume some orders thereby to allay their fury a little, all your friends here will be reduced to a miserable condition. For daily their cattle are killed, their horses pressed, and all the injury imaginable done to them and to no other. Do you hear religious persecution in this? It says, certainly your lordship's charter is not such a trifle as to be annulled by the bare allegations of such profligate wretches and men of such scandalous lives as Coode, Thurling, Jowls, and such fools as they have poisoned by the most absurd lies that were ever invented. What were the absurd lies? that the Jesuits were plotting, that Roman Catholicism couldn't be trusted, and that the government of Maryland had to change. Is that absurd, given the history of Roman Catholicism, both on the mainland and in Britain? It's not absurd at all. One would be foolish to suspect otherwise. But remembering this is a Catholic book by a Catholic author, putting Catholicism and the Maryland colony in the most favorable light, we are not to be deceived by that. Now, continuing, it says, the struggle of the high-spirited young attorney, that's Charles Carroll, to protect the property and the civil rights of his patron, Lord Baltimore, and his fellow Catholics soon brought him into trouble with the leaders of the rebellion, troubles with the Protestants. It says, with other Catholics, he was a prisoner for high misdemeanors that consisted of resistance to Coode and his followers, the Protestant rebellers. And it says, when Governor Copley arrived and took office, he had Carroll committed for several, quote, for several reflecting speeches and discourses against the government, unquote. That is the Protestant government. It says, in April 1693, he wrote to the governor saying he had been a fortnight in the sheriff's custody and asked for bail. He was accused of ridiculing the government by saying that for a small matter he could produce a nolle prosequi, which is, I looked it up, and it's a Latin term for a prosecutor or a litigant to drop the charges. So I'll read it that way instead of using the Latin term, the Latin legal term. He was accused of ridiculing the government by saying that for a small matter he could procure a drop of the charges, and that for a bottle of cider he could procure the release of fellow prisoners. If Carroll had made these boasts, as he may have done, he was able to take the measure of his accusers. He and the others who were arrested were soon released, but it took a bottle of cider to procure their release. That it took a bottle of cider to procure their release does not appear. So here we have a powerful, elite, wealthy, extremely wealthy Roman Catholic Carroll, Charles Carroll, put in prison and boasting that he could get himself and his co-religionists out of prison for a bottle of cider. Anyway, it says, although Lord Baltimore was deprived of the government of his colony, he still had some prerogatives left that had to do with his land interests. Carroll's term of office as Attorney General was not of long duration, but the Proprietary appointed him Registrar of Deeds, Receiver of Rents, and Surveyor General. He also acted as Baltimore's attorney and personal representative. He acquired lands in the province, naming different tracts after lands that had belonged to the family in Ireland. Carroll's Forest consisted of 500 acres of Prince George's County and was surveyed for him in 1689. Elio Carroll, 1,000 acres in Baltimore County, was surveyed in 1695, and soon after, Litter Luna, in the same county, a tract of 400 acres. New Year's Gift was surveyed in 1700, a plantation of 1,300 acres at a place known Elk Ridge. And I'll just cut the story short since we're running out of time. I'll continue this tomorrow. But when it's all said and done, 60,000 acres the Carroll families started with in this colony. 60,000 landed acres. And you have to ask yourself, where did it all come from? Who was propping up the Carroll family? We'll talk about it more tomorrow on Inquisition Update. Stay tuned for Nicholas Arthur's Cross the Border.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.